Why is inequality and inequalities important for the Americas? Why now?
Thanks. That's a great question, Amanda. Um, Most people, when they think about Latin America, if they think about it at all, they think of it as a very poor region of the world, a region of the world that somehow is not very modern. But what really distinguishes Latin America from other regions of the world is the very high and very persistent levels of inequality, the distances between rich and poor and between different groups of people. That has almost been a constant of Latin American history for the past 500 years. Um, Now it's becoming a very important problem in Latin America. It's being recognized more and more as a problem, particularly with the wave of progressive democratic regimes that began to rise in the region over the last 20 or 30 years. These regimes and a lot of social movements in Latin America are beginning to ask, how can we effectively end this high degree of inequality? What are inequalities? What kind of policies work to attenuate inequalities? And we're going to see what happens from there.
How did this book come together?
The book emerged out of a project that I developed when I was the director of Latin American and Caribbean Studies at Stony Brook University, where I still teach. And it was a visiting scholars program built around the problem called durable inequalities in Latin America. We brought 6 major scholars, younger scholars of Latin America, usually mainly from Latin America, to the university to work on their projects and to begin a larger set of discussions among faculty, graduate students, and other inequality groups. Um, the basis for the project was taking a seminal idea by the brilliant sociologist who recently died, Charles Tilly, who in 1998 wrote a broad conceptual book about inequality called Durable Inequalities. And we wanted to take the region of the world with obviously the most extreme inequalities, that is Latin America, and the longest and most persistent inequalities, and begin to look at whether Tilly's ideas, which are about categories of people and the relationships between people that make and reproduce inequality. We wanted to use Latin America as an area to explore these ideas and in some ways stretch them and criticize them. For one of the things that came out during our group was that Latin America showed the ways in which a theory such as Tilly's needed to have more history behind it because of the changes and camouflages of inequality, and needed to have more cultural ideas behind it because of the ways in which the culture creates and reproduces inequality than is normally associated with the social sciences. So what's new in this book is that we've taken a problem which is usually studied by hard social scientists like economists or sociologists, and we're trying to approach it in many ways softer and more historical and cultural ways.
The cover of your book is very interesting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay. Well, the cover of the book, maybe you can take a look right here, is from a series by a pretty remarkable Peruvian photographer called La Otra, the other, and her name is Natalia Iguinez. And this is a very dramatic picture of a obviously wealthy oligarchic woman and her maid. And it's part of this series that she did of rich limeñas with their maids. What I like about this photograph, what it represents very much about the book, is that it's really about a relationship. It's about a relationship of this very wealthy woman with another human being who's subordinate to her in many ways and is categorized in many ways. You can see that almost screaming at you from the photograph, which is very dramatic. What is even more interesting is that if you look at the whole series of Iguinez's work, is that many of the photographs are actually much more nuanced in how they approach the problem of inequality and the way that it's been modernized. And that's something that you'll actually find within the book, that not all relationships of inequality are as dramatic or even kinky as the one that's shown here on the cover.
Why should North Americans care about Latin American inequalities?
I think there are 2 major reasons. First of all, in case you haven't noticed, or we haven't noticed, in the past 30 years, inequality has become a major social problem in the United States. Since the 1980s, with the emergence of the so-called new economy, and exacerbated by the financial policies of presidents like Republicans like George Bush, the United States has actually emerged as one of the most unequal countries in the world once again. So we actually have a lot more in common in our social structure now, and the social problems and conflicts that's beginning to stimulate with countries like Mexico and Brazil. Over the past 30 years, the United States has begun to converge with a lot of the grotesque inequalities that have marked Latin America for the past 500 years. Another reason is that we actually are being affected quite directly by the inequalities of Latin America. Much of the migration of Latinos to the United States is actually a kind of transfer of inequalities from Latin America into the United States. And although it's another and longer story, the creation of new categories of inequality out of Latino migrants into the United States. So the processes are actually more and more linked between Latin America and North America, and around this growing and central theme for the 21st century of global inequalities.
Can you talk a little bit about the title of the book, Why Indelible Inequalities?
Well, a lot of people have actually asked me what indelible means. It's not unedible, but more a sense of their permanence, but in a kind of invisible kind of sense. One of that we chose the title indelible because indelible actually suggests something that's always there but can change. It can change its shade. And one of the most important parts, new insights that we're trying to develop about Latin American inequalities is how changeable they are over time rather than something that is just simply durable and permanent.